The final free agency position preview look ahead today is we're going to look at what the Pacers need to consider at the center position this offseason, why they would add a center, what realistic targets there are, what resources they should use on the spot. We'll break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today we are diving in to more free agency position previews for the Pacers. Today, we're going to look at the center spot, the last of the five positions. You can listen to point guard, shooting guard, small forward, and power forward within the last 8 or 9 episodes of this podcast feed. If you're interested in those today, we'll break down center. So as always, how these go. Segment 1, we'll look at why the Pacers would consider signing a center. What resources make sense for them to use at that position, given who they already have or given what they might need. Segment 2, we'll look at the best players at that position on the market. Would it make sense for the Pacers to pursue any of those guys? In segment 3, we'll close out by looking at some realistic targets. It's going to be fun. And the rest of this week will be all about the draft. The draft is Thursday, so we'll do draft preview, big boards, breakdowns, rumor roundup, break down who they draft. I'll probably do a bonus episode Saturday. There's a lot to talk about. So let's just dive right in. First of all, congrats to the Golden State Warriors. It's my first time recording since they won their championship. If you're on YouTube, you can see I am wearing my only article of Warriors clothing. And Kevon Looney was a very good center for the Warriors in this championship run. We're not going to talk about him too much today, but we will a little bit. But let's talk about the Pacers center position and what this offseason could look like for them. Because like point guard, this is one of the ones I want to do solo because there's fewer reasons for the Pacers to go after a center than, as usual for them, than other spots. And that's because it doesn't take a brainiac to look at their roster for next season and say, okay, Miles Turner's under contract and Goga Bitadze's under contract. Those guys have exclusively, basically their whole career, played center outside of a tiny bit, I guess, of the Mahinmi Turner stuff, Turner's rookie year. And then Isaiah Jackson's on the team. He probably will slot into being primarily a center at the pro level. He played 4 a little bit his rookie year, but he's a center. And Terry Taylor, who's probably best positions of 4, he also played a lot of center. And even if you want to say O'Shea Brissett, who played center his first season with the Pacers under Nate Bjorkgren a lot, they're kind of set. Even their emergency centers are already set. So there's not a lot of reason at first glance to say, why would the Pacers add a center? That's not something that looks like they need. And I agree. I think if the Pacers are considering how to allocate their resources this summer, nothing more than like the room exception makes any sense to spend on a big man. They already, even with trades, and I'll talk about that in a second, they will already have lots of options that make sense, right? Goga might be ready for the bigger role. If he's not, whatever, you can sign a vet backup. Isaiah Jackson maybe is ready for a bigger role. Brissett's done it before. Terry Taylor was good in the role if they trade Miles, for example. So like they have options ready to step up into this role if they trade Turner, if they trade Goga or Jackson or anyone else. I don't know why they would trade Jackson, I'm just listing names. They have guys ready. So the reasons they would sign a center are not super strong. That said, let's talk about what the Pacers were this past season, and specifically post-trading Sabonis. Because when they had Sabonis, their center spot was basically always him or Turner, on occasion a third guy when there were injuries, or Goga, for example. After they traded Sabonis, their season totally changed, right? First of all, Terry Taylor played center a lot, and that's not something that should happen very often, but the fact that they had to resort to that kind of shows that they did need sort of emergency centers last year. So if they do part with one of Turner or Goga, or both even, maybe having one more guy who can play center makes some sense because they needed him for depth. And part of that also, if you think about it, is, Tristan Thompson played like in the rotation for 4 games. Like they had other centers on the team after the Sabonis trade that got rotation minutes, and it made sense for that guy to play. O'Shea Brissett, same boat. Jalen Smith even played center for this team quite often this past season, and he never overlapped with Miles Turner, neither did Tristan Thompson, but he overlapped with every other guy I've named: Terry Taylor, O'Shea Brissett, Goga, and Isaiah Jackson, all healthy and available in times when Jalen Smith and Tristan Thompson were playing the 5. So there were moments where the Pacers had other guys available that played above guys on their team, and it made sense, and it was a decent allocation of resources. So maybe if there's a trade, and Turner is gone, or Goga is gone, and they have one de facto center and one kind of 4-5 backup, and then a bunch of 4s, more likely, maybe bringing in another guy makes some sense in that way. Like we saw that last season with the Pacers. They needed some resources after they traded Sabonis at the 5. So I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because, Miles in recent seasons has some injury history. Goga has injury history. Isaiah Jackson, it's hard to say because he's only played for 1 year, but you definitely need someone at that spot. And that's why the Pacers were playing guys out of position very often to fill the role. So as it stands right now, it doesn't seem necessarily needed that they would scoop one up. But considering that Goga is not an obvious trade candidate necessarily, but is probably the positive asset they're the most willing to part with, like they did with Aaron Holiday last summer, for example, and the fact that Turner's name will constantly be brought up, even though there's been some reporting on both sides of what they'd like to do with him. Even though both those are both the case, between everybody they could move on from, there's a pretty good chance you'd think the Pacers would move on from one, and then they will need a center. And I think that's kind of the crux of this discussion of why they would pursue a center, given what they have right now, is maybe they trade one of Miles or Goga, because then they really need one. They really need the depth. They definitely need like 10 minutes to soak up. And if there's an injury, they need like 25 minutes to soak up at the center spot. And if they trade one of their two, rotation guys going into next season, they will definitely need it more. So that is one. And this second point, kind of closing out the roster loop, looking ahead, the second point is not something you could say at point guard, right? At point guard, Tyrese Haliburton is the guy. He's very young. He's very good. You're not going to sign someone better than him. At center, I like Miles Turner. I'm a big fan of the skills he adds to a basketball team. He's very good. I think he'd fit well with the way Rick Carlisle and Tyrese Haliburton have set the team up. He'll be a natural fit. He can finally be unleashed at the 5, and that's all great. That said, unlike at point guard where the market wasn't as strong and Tyrese Haliburton's already very good, it's possible. There's really only one name, and I've already talked about him a little bit. I will again today. It is possible to get an upgrade at center, right? It's possible for the Pacers to sign someone better than Miles Turner at the center spot, and that is a reason to get a center. If you get a better player, especially a young one, and again, we'll talk about it. I've already done a whole show on this guy, but we'll talk about him next segment. That is another reason, if you're the Pacers, to pursue a center this summer. That would be the opposite use of resources than what I was just talking about. Given their current roster construction, if the Pacers head into free agency and they say, Miles Turner is our starting center, they should not spend very much money in free agency on the center spot. They've got a ton of backups. If they want to say someone else should be our starting center, maybe then they would spend a ton of money on someone awesome. Mainly one guy whose name has been associated with the Pacers at times this offseason for different reasons. Perhaps a second one, although I would not say so. So that's reason two. That was not the at point guard, there's very little reason for the Pacers to sign a point guard, given that they already employ a bunch, and because Tyrese Haliburton is a top 50 player in the NBA and is very good. Miles Turner is closer to that, also is on an expiring deal, and much easier to get a guy better than him this summer, given the market at the position. So between the Pacers' contract situation at center, the fact that they have a lot of depth between some of the young guys they have and some of the established guys who can play multiple positions, and the fact that Turner could just be on the team, they don't necessarily need a guy at this spot, but there is one upgrade out there that makes it potentially a position the Pacers would pursue someone awesome at. And if they make one trade of any of the guys I said, Miles Goga, Isaiah Jackson, Terry Taylor, or O'Shea Brissett, if any of them are gone, they need at least one more body that can, in theory, play the 5, whether that's defending pick and rolls or just being a bruiser down low. To some extent, they might need someone. So let's kind of cut through who's on the market to fit these needs for the Pacers. Because the center position, like every position this year, not the best class. It's not terrible. It's better than some of the forward spots, for example, but not the best group of players for the Pacers to be digging through. So let's talk about who the best guys available for the Pacers could be at this 5 spot and what some realistic targets are. We'll start with the absolute best cream of the crop guys this summer. Before we do that, though, really quickly, I would like to talk to you guys about betonline.net, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, Stanley Cup Finals going on now, Avalanche kicking butt, and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Tonight is Stanley Cup Finals Game 3 in Tampa Bay. Lightning favored by 2.5, despite being down 2-0 in the series. It's going to be a very, very fascinating game. Stanley Cup Finals have been awesome so far this year, even though the Avalanche are up 2-0. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They have the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, golf, baseball, like I already said, hockey. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at betonline.net, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, I'm going to have to guide you to the Locked On NBA Ultimate Mock Draft. The Pacers went in the first episode of the show. All the Locked On hosts presented their picks. We were allowed to make trades. And spoiler, I did, in fact, do one, which reveals a lot about my philosophy for the Pacers in this draft. But we did all the picks. We did all the draft. It's super awesome and insightful. We have a lot of league experts analyzing and breaking down the picks, including our Locked On Draft guys, as well as some former NBA executives and insiders. It's awesome. You got to check it out. Let's talk about the center position for the Pacers some more, including the best guys available on the market at the 5. And I'm not going to just dance around it. Let's get right to it. Deandre Ayton is a free agent. That's the big one. I did basically a whole podcast on this rumor, connecting the dots to the Pacers, what considerations they have. So we'll just talk about it here. Deandre Ayton is a very good basketball player, right? And there's a reason that he's been connected to the Pacers. Mainly being, it's been well reported, even I heard it at the time, there were some talks between Phoenix and Indiana back in February near the trade deadline about what a trade could look like in a Sabonis-Ayton deal. Other pieces would have had to be involved. Won't get into it too much. It didn't happen, but that's where the connection started. Ayton is very good. Sabonis would have made some sense for the Suns. Pacers get another young guy. Kind of telling about, honestly, how the Suns feel about Ayton, how the Pacers felt about their direction. A very revealing conversation, even though the Halliburton trade was definitely better to me. So that's where this all popped up. And the Pacers have cap space right now. So if the Suns, who it's been reported are potentially looking into what their future with Ayton might be, not on their team. There's been a lot of reporting about Ayton, so I'm just going to keep it vague with the phrasing on purpose, because there's been reporting on both sides of that, as there will be ahead of free agency. The Pacers have a bunch of cap space. They went after the guy at the deadline, or they talked about the guy at the deadline, I should say. In that case, does it make sense for him to sign with the Pacers? They've been connected and he's good. Well, sort of, I would say. So if you go back and listen, I think it was the first show I did in June, but it was about rumors about the Pacers. We talked about Russell Westbrook a little bit too. And I kind of cut through this Ayton stuff because a lot of the reporting or a lot of the discussion has been, well, the sign and trade. The Suns are going to sign and trade him because they don't necessarily feel like he's the best fit with their franchise. They can get other assets that make more sense, blah, blah, blah. And I hear that. I get why the Suns would want to do that. If you're the Pacers and you can just wave and stretch Goga and cut one minimum player, then you'll have max cap space. Why would you sign and trade for Ayton if you're the Pacers when you could just sign him? So if it's like the only way the Pacers can guarantee to get him, maybe. But anyway, it's a possibility that Ayton changes teams this summer because the Suns wouldn't want to pay him over $30 million a season. Okay, then he's available and maybe they won't match and he'll switch teams. And the Pacers could get the space to offer him a maximum contract. I don't think anything short of the max would not be matched by Phoenix, and I think other teams will offer the max. So the Pacers have to make a move to clear max space to get a guy like Ayton. Anyway, beyond cutting through the why the Pacers would offer him a deal and what it would look like, Ayton is very good. Obviously, was incredible in their playoff run when they reached the finals in 2021. Shot ridiculously well from the field. Was not as good in the playoffs this past season. Worse on the glass, less efficient from basically everyone on the floor. Didn't get as many touches, didn't play as much. His defense was worse. Lots of factors at play there. Still a good player. Still right on the Pacers timeline. First pick in 2018. He's only 23. He'll be 24 when next season starts. A lot of good reasons to fit him with the Pacers. It's also a very expensive guy, and there are some risks that come with that. You better know he's going to be an awesome fit with your team and be confident your team can be a winner if you're going to give that guy a bunch of money. Yes, the Pacers could, in theory, get a little bit of cap space next summer if they max Ayton this summer, but not a ton. Anyway, beyond diving through that, if the Pacers can just sign DeAndre Ayton, they should do it. If they can do it and they know that the Suns aren't going to match, theoretically, yeah, that's a good plan. Like, he's very good and very young, and it makes sense. I personally don't know that it would be what I would be tripping over myself to do if I were in charge of the Pacers or really any team. He's good. I don't think DeAndre Ayton's a $30 million a year player. But the Pacers situation, it does make sense to pursue a guy like Ayton in some capacity. He's very good. He's right on their timeline. His skills fit extremely well with Halliburton as a bouncy big. If someone can coach him to not take his stupid 10-foot one-legged fadeaway jumpers, that'd be awesome too. But he is quite good. He would be a smooth transition. He can even play with Turner for a year if they kept Turner around. Doesn't really block any of their current young guys, especially because Goga is in his last season of his deal. But there are a lot of reasons for the Pacers to pursue Ayton, and he is the prize of the summer. So while I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the premises around how the Pacers should acquire Ayton that I've seen out there, and by the way, no insider has reported that the Pacers have free agency interest in Ayton. A lot of other teams have been connected by various insiders. No one has said Pacers and Ayton because it doesn't really make sense at this time, to me at least. It would make sense next summer more so than this summer, and as a max guy, it's just not the time for the Pacers to be signing a max guy. But if they can, and if they know they can get a guy like Ayton, who's talented, super young, and good, all right, yeah, that makes sense. They should consider that option if it's out there. And if Ayton really is going to leave Phoenix, or the Suns really aren't going to match, he is the prize. He is the center class in free agency. Like, this is not a good group of players. There are some good players in here that I would like to talk more than 2 seconds about. But Ayton is the guy. If you can get Ayton and improve your team, you'd be locking in. The Pacers would be basically that Halliburton, Ayton, Duarte, and their 6th pick this year, or whatever they do in the draft. That's their core. They are saying, this is it. We think this can be a championship core, whatever the ceiling that is put on it. And if they think that, it makes sense to go for Ayton and give him a lot of money. And I suppose I would understand if that happened, even though I would not personally agree with the evaluation and resource spending. But Ayton is very good, and he is the prize of the center free agency class. And I think that if you see the Pacers making some interesting salary dump moves this summer, like trading a second with Goga to clear up space, because they don't have to trade a second with Goga to clear space. But if they did something like that, the radar should be sounding that the Pacers are trying to do something big. I don't expect that deal necessarily, but something like that. Anyway, Ayton is the guy in free agency at the center position this summer. If the Pacers consider it, it does make sense, even though it wouldn't be what I do. There are other good players at the center spot I want to bring up. Not very many. There are 4 player names I will bring up, though. Guy coming off of, there's only 2 players at the center spot who made more than $10 million last year that are free agents this summer. One is Ayton, who the 4th year of his rookie deal was over $10 million. It's crazy how much the rookie scale has jumped. The other one is Jusuf Nurkic from Portland. Jusuf Nurkic is a very good player when he plays. He was a 15 points per game score this past season. He was a 15 and 11 guy. Like, I don't think people realize how good Nurkic can be, mostly because he's been like the 4th or 5th best player on his team his entire career. But Jusuf Nurkic is a good player, one of the best screeners in the league, good on the glass, good enough finisher in the paint. He's good. I think that he'll probably return to Portland. His on-off with the Trailblazers this season, by the way, plus 14. Right? They were the Blazers finished with about the same record as the Pacers. I think 1 win less or 2. And they were an even net rating team when Nurkic played. And they were negative 14 with him out, right? Like, massive impact on that team. Good player, right around the age of Dame. He's only 27, quietly not an old guy. Like, he's good. And if the Pacers are trying to be a competitive team next year, he could make some sense to them. He'd be a really good fit with Halliburton as a screen and roll guy. He's got good hands. Besides not dunking when he's wide open under the basket, he's a pretty good offensive player when used appropriately. He's not a good shooter. His defense leaves something to be desired, but he is good. And it would make sense if the Pacers are trying to be good. He could be a guy on like a bloated 2-year deal right before they have to pay Halliburton. That makes some sense, for example, for them to pursue. Although, again, that would it would require a turn or trade for me to think it makes sense to go after a guy like Jusuf Nurkic. The next guy, there's going to be 2 guys I want to bring up that I suppose the Pacers could pursue and still keep Turner on the team for one more season, but they'd have to know that a Turner deal was coming or that they weren't going to re-sign him. 2 young bigs who are good and could be had from their old teams. One is Mo Bamba. Bamba is a restricted free agent, so it might be a little hard to get him from Orlando, but it's an Orlando team that has a top pick and is between a 6'10 Jabari Smith, a 6'10 Paolo Banchero, and a 7-foot Chet Holmgren is likely picking someone to join their front court that already has Wendell Carter, for example, that already has other talented tall pieces, right? After trading Vizic, Franz Wagner, for example, who they drafted last year, his brother Mo Wagner, who they acquired in free agency last year. Jonathan Isaac is 6'11 and rejoining that team. There's a lot of crowd in that Orlando front court. And Mo Bamba was great for the Magic in his 4th year. He finally got it all to click, right? 11 points a game guy, 8 boards, really good around the rim defense. And by the way, this is the big one, 38% from 3 on 280 attempts for a game. He put it all together. He was quite solid for Orlando this past season, above average efficiency, really solid defender, really good blocks guy. Sound a lot like a Pacers player. So Mo Bamba's a guy that I think, because he can shoot now, could fit alongside a Turner or alongside any of the Pacers bigs in any sort of weird 4-5 combos. He is also, like Ayton, will be 24 at the start of next season, talented and good. So I think he's the one that the Pacers, it makes a little bit of sense to pursue at the right price, especially if the Magic do not plan on retaining him. though I understand that as a restricted free agent, it does not make a lot of sense for the Pacers to pursue him, but he is quite good and one of the best 5 centers on the market. The other young guy is Mitchell Robinson. Mitchell Robinson, now an unrestricted free agent. Very interesting the way his contract career has kind of progressed with the New York Knicks. But yeah, Mitchell Robinson, an unrestricted free agent, 4 years in the league now with the New York Knicks. Led the league in field goal percentage his second season in the league. This is not a typo. He shot 76% this past season with the Knicks, right? That is crazy. That wasn't even the league leading number. Pretty good rebounder, almost 9 a game. Started a bunch for that New York team, right? Really good blocks guy. Everybody knows what Mitchell Robinson is. He's very much a 5 feet and in guy. He's a lob dude. He's a good defender, and he is good. He is a good player. 70% true shooting is awesome, even if it's easy shots. If every player in the league could have that, they would do it, right? Mitchell Robinson is quite good. And so he, like Mo Bamba, is a bridge kind of, okay, this guy, he, again, 24 when next season starts. We also share a birthday, so I have a little soft spot here. But, at the right age to fit the Pacers core, would help them on either end of the floor. So he can't, because he's not a shooter. He would not fit as well with Turner if they tried to do that. But he's young enough that I would understand why the Pacers would pursue him. I think the fifth best center free agent, and this can be debated. There's a lot of good, like I say, Hartenstein's pretty good. JaVale McGee had a good season. Zubac from the Clippers is solid. Ibaka has had solid moments. There's a lot of names. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Andre Drummond is kind of the last guy I want to talk about in the good center free agent section, the top center free agent section. He really kind of fixed his career in Brooklyn. He was good with the Nets, right? 12 points, 12 and 10 guy for them on 61% shooting. He still has all the limitations he's had throughout his entire career, but I still think he can be that guy on any team, right? In 22 minutes, he was a 12 and 10 guy. So yes, extremely limited in a lot of aspects of the game, but a 2-time All-Star who can give you 12 and 10 in half the minutes of the game is appealing to me, at least to some extent, even though his limitations obviously are immense. So he's one of the best rebounders in basketball. If the Pacers pursued him because they had an opening at center, it would make some sense. But I don't think of the top guys available, I think Bamba makes the most sense as a fit with the Pacers. I think Ayton makes a lot of sense if the Pacers try to upgrade or use all their resources on a stud, because they have a lot of resources now and they can. But I really don't think that any of these guys make the most sense, especially if the Pacers keep every center they already have, which I don't expect that to be the case, given their situation and kind of what's been floated out there, what's been discussed in the past. But it's possible, and if they do keep all the guys that they currently have, even a guy like Ayton doesn't really make sense at this time. In next summer, it would make more sense, but right now it makes a little less sense. Let's talk about some realistic options for the Pacers if they pursue a center in free agency. I'm going to dice this up into if they keep Miles Section and if they don't keep Miles Section, because I think the targets, some could be in both groups, but are largely different depending on what the Pacers do. The current starting 5-man, Miles Turner. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, please hop on over to our Locked On NBA mock draft. I mentioned it earlier. The ultimate mock draft has been made. Search it. 50 insiders, Odyssey Sports experts, draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board, me and everybody else. It's underway. Mock drafts are awesome. It's draft week. Hop on that train. Realistic targets for the Pacers at center. I've divided this into two groups again, with Miles Turner, without Miles Turner. And let me tell you, the with Miles Turner group is basically guys who can play the 4 or guys who can shoot, or kind of a mixture of both. And the first one is Gorgui Dieng. Gorgui Dieng is now way older than I thought. When I saw his name on the free agency list, I thought it made a lot of sense. He still seems like he hasn't been in the league that long. He got drafted in 2013. Anyway, Gorgui Dieng, despite being 32, if the Pacers do try to be good next year, and if they keep Miles Turner, that is potentially an indication that they're trying to be better next season. He has revitalized himself as a three-point shooter, right? Has been basically since the start of the 2018 season, a pretty solid guy from beyond the arc. Since the start of that season, a 38% three-point shooter, Gorgui Dieng. So a decent offensive threat because of that. His defense has been solid his entire career, dating back to when he was with the Timberwolves for a bunch of seasons. So he is a quality player. He did fine for the Hawks this season in a backup role. I don't think he should play with Miles a lot, but if the Pacers need a big and they have Turner on the team still, I think a guy like Gorgui Dieng who can play 4 and 5 because he can spread out and he can do a little bit on defense is one guy who makes a little bit of sense. And at his age, he's not going to cost more than $3 million a season. So that makes some sense for the Pacers. Maybe a room exception guy if they move on from Goga and determine Isaiah Jackson can play the four. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons to do that. But the next one here, and this one makes sense because the Pacers and any team that's young can always gain a lot from having veterans around. Why do you think the Heat keep Udonis Haslem forever? Why do the Warriors keep Andre Iguodala forever? Having these vets has a ton of value. Those teams are obviously very successful, but even on young teams, vets are extremely important. Serge Ibaka, NBA champion with the Toronto Raptors just 2 seasons ago, 3-time all-defensive guy. His resume obviously was much better in the past, and that season with the Raptors was his last truly good season in the NBA. He's really fallen off the last 2 years. He is 32 right now, but he is clearly starting to decline in impact. As a player, his shot's going a little bit away. He's less mobile. He'd be a great veteran presence, though, because he can also play the four. These contending teams continue to think he's a good fit for them as a 4 or 5 kind of hybrid, and the Pacers aren't a contending team, but should they have the option to have Ibaka be, a deep reserve vet guy who plays 10 minutes a game because he can fit alongside Turner or as the lone center or as a 4, that makes a lot of sense to me. The last one here, if they keep Miles, besides the ones I said earlier, by the way, Mo Bamba, if they keep Miles, makes a lot of sense. Mitchell Robinson, if they keep Miles, makes less sense than Bamba, but a little bit of sense. The last one here, a flyer guy. And this one is you take him for the minimum and just hope that it's something that could work because his highest flashes have been really high, but there's a reason he has not played very much throughout his career. That player is Bull, a very, very, very strange restricted free agent this summer. Got drafted, got on a 2-way, went crazy in the bubble for the Nuggets. Was a little better the next year, but also not quite so good. Anyway, low stats guy his whole career, super unproven, right? 53 games played. He's been in this NBA for 3 years. He's still only 22 and has only played 53 games. That's close to a blank slate, and so I put him on this list because I kind of consider him a second contract guy. Maybe Bull can be something interesting. And so that's why, as a 22-year-old, perhaps if you're the Pacers and you have a couple minutes to give out at center, you'd say, you know what? Let's try Bull. Let's see what we can do. Let's see if he can be someone on either end of the floor with that length, with that shooting ability, decent enough handle, not good, but decent enough. He's unique, and I think that makes him intriguing for a young team that's sort of a blank slate like the Pacers. And because he can shoot a little bit and spread it out, right? 37%. Again, 38 attempts here we're talking, so not very much. But looks like he can shoot it. Could fit with Miles if the Pacers go that route. Now, the other route of this free agency is if the Pacers don't keep Miles Turner, who makes sense as a center? Because then all of a sudden you could be talking like, not starter minutes, because it'll probably go to Isaiah Jackson or Goga at that point, but maybe they want a vet just to play 20 minutes as their starter. Then basically any free agent makes some sense because after Ayton, Nurkic, Drummond, Mitch Rob, the guys I already said, Mamba, if those guys are gone, but they also traded Turner, then basically any center out there makes sense because none of the rest of the centers are worth more than maybe $8 million at most. So you could just throw a 1-year deal at someone to be a stopgap, like a JaVale McGee or like a Robin Lopez or like an Ed Davis. And these guys are good, right? They wouldn't make the Pacers that much better. They're not moving the needle, but if Miles is gone and the best options are not available, or the Pacers don't want to spend a lot at center, a lot of these guys are potentially options to just soak up minutes at the spot. Now let's talk about some serious ones that are actually like, this guy's good or could make some sense on the Pacers. One is Naz Reid. He has a club option. The Timberwolves are almost certainly going to pick that up. But if they don't, or if for some reason he becomes available, that is one the Pacers could look at. Only 22 years old. Quite good for Minnesota. Averaged over 10 points a game 2 seasons ago. Decent enough on the glass. Super athletic. That's one that makes sense if Turner is not with the Pacers next season. Isaiah Hartenstein. Mentioned him earlier. Same deal as Naz Reid. Club option with the Clippers. Very unlikely he even becomes a free agent. If, though, he does. $7 million on a very, very expensive Clippers team. It's going to be scared of the tax. Maybe they decide to let Zubac be out there. Or a guy like, there's a million guys who kind of fit this vein. But Zubac, Naz Reid, those are 2 I typed down. But even then, Tony Bradley, he's only 22. He's a player option with the Bulls. Could he get more than $1.9 million this summer as a 24-year-old? Maybe, especially if the Pacers have a role to offer him. Perhaps that's something he pursues. Dwayne Dedmon, there's a million. Biyombo finally recaptured his career with Phoenix. There's a bunch of them. But one I want to shout out, just for the fun of it, DeMarcus Cousins. If the Pacers have 10 minutes to give out at center a game, why not give it to Boogie? He's become a better locker room guy. He has been playing better in his recent stops, including being in Denver's playoff rotation. and being a 10-3 guy in the postseason, right? His defense was not very good. The Nuggets did not have a good playoff run, but he was okay in the playoffs. DeMarcus Cousins still has some left in the tank. If the Pacers are trying to be good but also trade Miles Turner, there are crazier things to be said than giving DeMarcus Cousins 10 minutes a game on a $2 to $3 million contract. Luke Kornet's out there. He's kind of been a shooter in pass stops. I think that's almost everybody on the list. Dwight Howard's out there. He'll probably go to a glamour market and chase a ring. So there are a million names if Turner's not on the Pacers. But I think that first list I went through, your Gorgie Jangs, your Isaiah Hartensteins, your Mo Bambas, those are the guys that I think if the Pacers do wind up signing a center that make the most sense. But what I think makes the most sense is that Miles Turner is the Pacers starting center this coming season. See how he fits with Hallie. It's not like his trade value is going to drastically drop between now and the trade deadline. It will a little bit for sure, and that is reason to trade him. And if he's on the team after draft night, that's a little different too, because he's traded on draft night. That still has him having a little more value. His new team will be able to extend it before the season if that is the case. And the Pacers could, in theory, draft a center. Will they? I highly doubt it. But could they? Yeah. And then a lot of what I said becomes completely moot because they'd have 3 young centers on the team. So if you think I missed someone, or think any of these guys make some actual sense for the Pacers for a reason I didn't describe, either comment on YouTube or tweet at me at TEastNBA. And this podcast is on Twitter at LockedOnPacers. For the rest of this week, draft stuff. Every single episode this week will be about the draft. Tomorrow, we'll hit the rumors and the big board. Wednesday, I'll have a guest, probably a beat writer, insider who's been to all the workouts as well. We'll talk about the draft storylines. Thursday, I'll do a draft preview, looking at anything that might have happened already leading up to the draft, looking at what the Pacers' goals need to be. Friday, a breakdown of whatever happens that crazy night as usual. And Saturday, probably a bonus pod talking about the new best player the Pacers got, whatever that happens to look like. So there's going to be probably bonus episodes this week. There's a lot to talk about as free agency ramps up, and I hope you guys enjoy it all. Everybody, I hope you had a wonderful weekend. If you're a father and you're still listening, I hope you had a wonderful Father's Day. Or if you're a son, I hope you spent time with your dad if you were able to as well. Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with me on this wonderful Monday or Tuesday or whenever you're listening. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow.